I would like to thank you so much for being here today for what many of us, I think, consider the kickoff to the holiday season. My name is Vito Labate. I am the president of the alumni of Victoria College. I'm a 2000 Vic grad myself, and I'll be your host this morning, very happily to do so. To begin our time together, I want to offer first a land acknowledgement and encourage each of you to reflect on your place in the world as I give the acknowledgement here. We acknowledge that the sacred land on which Victoria University operates and pay respect to those who came before us. The campus has been a site of human activity for many thousands of years. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, Toronto is the home of many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to study, live, love, and work in the community and on this territory. And so, on behalf of the AVC executive, it is my pleasure, distinct pleasure, to welcome you, along with Victoria's President and Vice Chancellor, Rhonda McEwen, Chancellor Emerita, Dr. Wendy Cecil, and many other special guests here to this morning's event. It wouldn't be the holiday season without our Vic Chorus, whom you just heard performing so beautifully as you joined the event today. We will hear another song from them at the conclusion of today's event. And I'll tell you, it's always such a pleasure to hear from this talented group as they perform for us. So I'll take a moment now. It's my pleasure to welcome Louise Yearwood. Louise is the Executive Director of Alumni Affairs and Advancement. And I want to introduce Louise to introduce our next speaker. So over to you, Louise, please.
Thank you so much, Vito. And as a member of the executive of the AVC, I add my warm welcome to Vito's. I'm also an alum, so it's just wonderful to be with you all today. And I extend my warmest wishes for a safe and happy holiday season to all of you. So I have the great pleasure of introducing someone who really needs no introduction at this point, but we're very fortunate today to have our very own President and Vice Chancellor, Rhonda McEwen, as our guest speaker. In addition to her leadership role here at Victoria University, Dr. McEwen is also the Canada Research Chair in Tactile Interfaces, Communication and Cognition at the University of Toronto, and Professor of Emerging Media and Communication. An international scholar in the field of human-machine communication, President McEwen's work combines communication studies and applied and behavioral sciences to examine the social and cognitive effects of technologies. So we are so pleased that President McEwen is able to join us today for what I am sure will be an intriguing look at social robots. So President McEwen, thank you so much, and over to you.
First, thank you so much, Louise, and to the organizers. So our Alumni Affairs and Advancement Office, my AAA, are amazing. And I want to also thank Vito and the alumni group for inviting me to speak to you this Saturday morning. And I have our Vic, beautiful old Vic behind me and a bit of a wintry scene. So our communication department have given me a new set of slides that will be appropriate to the season. And so it's nice to have this behind me, as I always actually feel I have Victoria University behind me. So I want to start off by offering my warm congratulations to our Victoria College graduates for 2022. I know this is your moment, and soon we will be celebrating a little bit more with graduates who did not get a chance to cross this stage, but will now, actually next week. And I'm really looking forward to celebrating with them as graduates as well. So let's get started. I want to just give a little context about this particular lecture. I of course love technology. This is the field that I have built my career around, and it was also my former career as a management consultant. I was in the area of technology as well. So I'm going to share with you some of the research that we've been doing in my lab, and I'm also proud to maybe give you a sneak information that my lab that I've moved and opened now at Victoria University in Burj Carnegie for now is now ready to have people visit me. So we did the last tightening of our island keys yesterday, and my team of 10 lab students are really excited to share some of what we're doing in the lab. Some of the things we're doing in the lab, you'll see right here on the screen next to me. You'll see that we are looking at, so for example, robots. Robots are a big part of what we do in the lab. We look at how people interact with robots and look at big complex questions like, do we trust robots? How does AI integrate into our lives? And we'll hear a little bit about that in this lecture. We also talk obviously about person-to-person communication and how it shifts and changes. The pandemic gave us was a very hard and difficult time for humanity. Many people really suffered in the last couple of years. It did give researchers like me a chance to understand when very difficult circumstances arise in the world, how our communication patterns evolve and change. And in particular, we looked at in my lab how practices of being changed when we were in lockdown. And we looked at both mainland China and people in the diaspora from China in Canada. We did a comparative study, so we could talk about that in the Q&A later if you'd like. I'm going to focus more, however, on artificial intelligence and Alexa for this talk. But in the lab, we also look at cognition. So, the kind of image, the image of a brain with all these synapses. My work in cognition and media often explores this, not just for neurotypical people, but those who are neurodiverse, who have issues with memory, for example. This is something that we look at in the lab. And of course, we look at a host of social media, so much happening in Twitter right now. If you caught the President's Circle talk I gave earlier this year, which was about really about social media in Canada, but in particular Twitter, I think you might have been well prepared to listen to all the news that has unfolded so far. And last, in the lab, we are doing a lot in VR. So you could ask me about that later, or you could come visit the lab where you'll be able to actually put on some VR headsets and learn more about how we're exploring the use of VR in learning complex ideas. So this is kind of all sort of the things happening in the lab. I want to actually also kick this talk off with making sure that we appreciate that in the work that I do, I'm looking not just at technology. I'm just not a lover of tech, and I don't believe that tech solves all our problems. In fact, I'm more interested in the consequences of using technologies in our lives, in our daily lives. And so I bring together the technical and the social. And in the way I phrase it, I bring together the human and the machine. So today, what I want to talk about is humans and machines, sort of the story of how interdisciplinary range, and I'll talk a little bit about range, but I can say that all of you who have graduated from Victoria University understand range, especially those who went through the VIC-1 program. And so this really speaks to you. One of the most beautiful things that attracted me to being your senior leader here is this VIC-1 program and the approach that Victoria University has taken well in advance of many other higher learning institutions, of understanding the power of intellectual range. The idea that we may have disciplinary depth in one area. It could be management or commerce. Your depth could be in the sciences. It could be in the humanities, in Renaissance studies that Vic is well known for, doing a fantastic and critical work in literary studies and English and so on. So it doesn't really matter where your area of depth is, but what really is powerful is range. And I will talk to you about that and how the VIC-1 program really demonstrates how we can take ideas from different disciplines, bring them together to solve what is now being called wicked problems in the world. And wicked problems are exactly the kind of problems that my lab will look at. Wicked is the term that we're using now to describe some of the most challenging and complex issues of our time, many of which threaten, for example, human health. So if you talk about climate change, biodiversity loss in this epoch of the Anthropocene, persisting poverty, which I know that and issues of food insecurity that our Chancellor Nick Saul, has dedicated his life to helping solve, or advancing obesity epidemics. These are examples of wicked problems. And really what we have found from many studies now is that the way to solve these kinds of problems is by bringing an interdisciplinary approach and this idea of range. So I got into tech, but I didn't come into tech directly. I actually did my undergrad in a mixture of sociology and management information systems. And it's in watching those things marry that I began to understand that there was a particular kind of approach we could take to see how we could solve some issues, not just broad wicked problems of the world, but it might be wicked problems within an institution you find yourself working in or supporting in some other way. I was very interested in Amazon from very early. So when I was doing my MBA at City University of London in England, Amazon was just starting. And so it was as if when I began my entry into interdisciplinary studies, Amazon came up at the same time. So in a way, we've been hanging out together for quite a couple of decades now. So Amazon at the time, in sort of 1996, 1997, was a small online bookseller. It was just starting up. So for some of you on this call, you will remember that is Amazon's beginning. For some who know it now and are avid Prime users, you may not know that was actually the start for Amazon. And so what I was interested in is, and I've been following, is Amazon's trajectory over time and how they've actually changed the business model and their focus. They're in the news this week and last week, talking about how they're grappling with the change in people's buying behaviors as people emerge from lockdowns and hit the brick and mortar high streets again, the change in people's spending patterns. But Amazon started playing in artificial intelligence on the cloud with AWS, their advanced web services, for some time now. So they've been kind of one of those leaders that I've been following. So many of the things that I tell you about that connect to my studies of humans and machines can actually be held in this little case study of Amazon. So I'll talk about that today, and then we can, as I say, open for questions at the end, and happy to talk about any of the different projects we're working on in the lab. So the title for this is Alexa, Are You My Friend? The Rise of the Social Robots. And one of the really interesting ways, and you can hear how I'm phrasing that, is this idea that the Alexa that you may have on your devices, you may inadvertently, like myself, brought Alexa into your home, or thinking about it as a gift, for example, for someone during the holiday season, is a way for me to spark maybe some interest in you with some of the big thoughts we have in the field that I work in, which is called human-machine communication. So Google Assistant is another example of these emerging technologies. Apple Siri is also in this group, and we have called them virtual assistants. But really what they are a form of artificial intelligence system that are designed to understand human natural language voice commands and to complete tasks for us as requested. From a communication theory perspective, virtual assistants or VAs, like the ones that I've just talked about, are called software robots. They do not have a physical form that we've associated with robots. For example, in pop culture, we've gotten used to thinking about C-3PO in Star Wars and sort of that sort of humanoid form. But they do use the same user interfaces as most human-to-human conversations do, this idea of a back and forth voice exchange. And so social robots show us what coming hardware robots will be expected to do in the future. And so they're an excellent example for us of how we actually can train up these next forms to do the things that we are looking for them to do. Obviously, robotics will increase the use of voice user interfaces, much like we see in Alexa and other voice assistants, because communication is familiar to most people. Using voice communication in particular is particularly effective. The shorter learning curve basically means that people will complete tasks that are simpler and faster. It's easier to do voice integration. For example, menus, hard to use menus. I don't know if many of you struggle with many buttons to touch. And this was some of the sort of real user interface innovation in Apple products from very early on, to move away from having a host of buttons and things to remember to hit keystrokes, and to move more and more into programming voice as the main interface for robotics. So software robots, like we see in Alexa, Siri, and Google products, are test beds for the foundations of what we can anticipate in embodied robots that will set the stage for what is to come. So here are the ones that you may know of, that you've seen before. As I said, they are embedded with a lot of technology and artificial intelligence, and I'll share a little bit about that with you as well. And as I said, voice communication is the key here, and it has been the distinguishing feature for virtual assistants. So the agenda for now, I'm going to talk a little bit of how Alexa works. So that'll be a first question that we'll address today. Second question, what are social robots exactly? The third, how do social robots work more generally? And I'll give you the tiniest walk by the history of AI. And then the fourth question, what does communicating with robots mean for us in society? And the fifth, can we opt out of a world of human-machine communication? So many people, maybe some here this morning, have opted out, for example, on the use of social media. The question is it going to be the same kind of possible opt-out as we move into a world where there's more request for human-machine communication and more embedding of those technologies in our societies? So I'm going to actually start with just a little bit of technology. Sort of the first question, how does Alexa actually work? So devices like Alexa use what we call built-in technology that matches what you've said to the acoustic patterns of a wake word. And so the wake word is the word that is used to say to the device, I'm asking you to do something for me. This technology is at the back of that technology is called keyword spotting. So the device is continuously looking and searching and trying to spot information that's coming out. And so one of the things that we find fascinating here is that the device has to detect the wake word. So it sends a request to Amazon Cloud. The cloud itself uses its powerful capabilities to verify that wake word as a request that is being processed. And after confirmation, there's an answer to that request sent back to you. So for example, if you say, Alexa, what is the weather in Toronto today? Amazon will take the word Alexa as its wake word and then process that. It's not being processed in the device in your home. It's actually being processed in the cloud. So social robots and voice assistants use our requests to train machines in speech recognition. And this is exactly what we are focusing on. So we're talking about natural language understanding systems, and training Alexa is done using real world patterns. So sometimes even as you make mistakes and Alexa's not understanding, for example, the diversity of accents or languages that is being requested by, those errors are being used to train Alexa and all the other Alexas around the world on responding more correctly the next time this same issue comes up. So many people don't realize that a lot of what they're doing is ending up being in a training bed, and you have agreed to be part of the training system that will go in and allow supervised machine learning, which is what we call this, to happen. And that's a practice, actually, where it's not just magical. It's not just heading into the cloud and being organized. They're actually people. So they're humans reviewing a small sample of the requests that came in and actually correcting the interpretation and of the request to provide the appropriate response in future. So, for example, Amazon will pay people to review a Whitby customer's request for a train schedule to go from Queens University to downtown. If the person identified that Alexa misinterpreted it as a request for a schedule between Queens, New York, and Manhattan, this would be an example of what the human trainers on the back end will use to check and see what went wrong in that exchange for Alexa to have misunderstood and given the wrong response. And we will see how humans continue to be used within the Alexa platform. So one of the things that I find fascinating is this question of how Alexa works. Very often people will worry that Alexa is always listening to them. As they go about their normal business in their home, if you have an Echo or some other Alexa device, that Alexa is constantly listening to you. And in a way, this isn't incorrect. So Alexa is constantly listening out for that, the wake word that I talked about. And to do that, there has to be a microphone and a speaker and listening in for it. So Alexa does do that. Now, this slide is from Alexa, from Amazon, that owns Alexa, and here they say that you can manage your voice recordings, that you can view, hear, or delete your recordings at any time, and they give you an example of how to do that, because many people don't realize that even after they've finished using the device, that those recordings they've been recorded and they're being used. And so periodically I go through this exercise in my own home of deleting those messages, so that I just feel like having all of the things that are being recorded is probably not the best idea. So I go ahead and delete it. And I realized the other day that the pathway that is suggested to do it is a little more complicated now. You actually have to go in online and actually do it. I used to be able to just say to Alexa to delete my voice recordings, but it doesn't do that part anymore. You actually have to go in and do a little bit of more work. So I think these are some of the interesting pieces that we're finding, that things change over time. Even the way these devices work change over time. And so this is something to really be aware of as you go about your day. So I wanted to share with you a little bit of fun. One day I asked Alexa if she was my friend. And so this is the second question. Are social robots, are they our friend? And I thought, well, that would be perfect to actually ask Alexa, are you my friend? And so here's the response I got.
Alexa, are we friends?
We're definitely friends, but are we besties? To see how well you know me, just say, quiz me about you.
Alexa, quiz me about you.
It's time to test your AIQ. I'm gonna ask 3 questions that are all about yours truly. Let's see how well you really know me. Question 1. My birthday is November 6th. True or false?
True.
Well done. I said hello to the world on November 6th, 2014. Question 2. Is my refrigerator running? True or false?
False.
Wrong. My refrigerator is running. In fact, it's training for a 5K. Question 3. My favorite food is pizza. True or false?
False.
Bingo. While I appreciate food and drink, my taste is better reflected in the company I keep.
I don't.
All right. Let's check how you did. You missed 1 out of 3. Good, but not great. Wah, 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 wah. You should spend a little more time getting to know me. Do you want to play the quiz again?
No.
Okay, thanks for playing.
So that was my little experiment with Alexa. And it was fascinating for me, this kind of response to the question that I asked. I don't know if you picked up on some of the patterns there, but there's so much richness in analyzing this. First, obviously it was it's what we call a dyadic or two-person based on an exchange. So we observe, if I talk to you in person, we usually observe certain protocols in our exchange. So interpersonal communication, there's actually an algorithm to it. And we teach, from very early, we teach children how people exchange in polite conversation. So for example, we might say, we don't interrupt. You don't try not to interrupt people when they're speaking. We take turns in our exchange. And you can see that they have patterned the AI for Alexa after that idea. Then we also know that question asking and response is part of a normal human-to-human exchange in communication. And you could see that following here. Perhaps you picked up on some other ones. Did you maybe notice jokes and using a humor as a way of building a relationship and an exchange? So there was a joke, about the pizza, and then the little
It's
sound
on my computer screen. I
think someone's microphone might be still on. But I'm going to take questions a little bit later. So if that's okay, I think I heard maybe a question coming through. But one of the things I was interested in seeing is how much the engineers and as they design the AI try to follow the same patterns that we see in human-to-human exchange. So we also demonstrate an understanding of each other because we will respond within an acceptable parameter range. So for example, if I ask my friend, what movie did you last watch? I don't expect to hear an answer about their assignment marks from a recent test as an answer to that question. And so it's interesting to see that the AI is working within the same parameters. For a question that I ask, the answer would come in particular ways. And then it's interesting that the AI, because it's not as sophisticated as some other AIs, I work with GPT-3, which is an open source text-based AI that's available as well. GPT-3 lets the human take the reins in the exchange, whereas Alexa and the other voice assistants tend to be responsive. But if you ask it a set of questions like this, it's built, a recording has been built. What's fascinating about this too is I have asked Alexa this question multiple times now, and it changes over time. So obviously the AI is learning in the back end, and it learns that humans don't want the identical exchange next time. So it will ask different questions of me in the AI IQ quiz that it gives me to figure out if we're friends or not. And so that's also interesting to me, how we build this idea of building knowledge about Alexa as a way of cementing our friendship. How much do you know about me? That tells us whether we're friends. And then it used common phrases like bestie or, wah, wah, wah at the end as a kind of, again, comedic turn. It also used a term, yours truly. So again, these are sentiment-based communication pieces that have been built into the AI to try and really get to this idea that Alexa is not just a machine, but Alexa can help form friendships or companionship. And this will come up again as we go on. So the designers drew on psychology. So some of you that recently graduated, or even if it was of some time ago, or work in the field that involves psychology, will recognize psych research coming in here, this idea of perception and social emotional intelligence and theory of mind. These are theoretical ideas that get built in and put into technology. And again, I started to talk about range and interdisciplinarity. So you can see here this idea of pulling from different disciplinary backgrounds to solve this issue of speaking with machines intelligibly. How are these devices marketed? This has been another interest of mine. Obviously, having had an MBA, I always tend to look at this idea of marketing. How do we actually get these? How do we position these kinds of products in the market? And one way that we've seen over and over is this idea of digital caregiving, right? And this is why the question, is Alexa my friend? a kind of a provocative one, because it does lean in to how these devices are being marketed. There was just as the pandemic was hitting, sort of end of 2019, in the San Diego Union Tribune, this quote: "Voice technology, like the Amazon Echo pictured here, allows seniors to safely interact with their physical environment while keeping connected with friends and family." So you see here, really drawing on that social emotional piece on safety, with the idea that many seniors were sort of separated and locked away from their families during the pandemic, and how these companies kind of capitalized or used that as a point of arbitrage to get in and to solidify their position in the market. It is also used for entertainment, for sure. Those of you who have younger people in the household, I do have some nieces and nephews that they'll come over and they will play with Alexa. They will tell jokes. They will ask information to find answers. Very often, instead, it's telling generationally how we handle information seeking. So for my teenage children, my older teens, if we're at the dinner table where we are not allowed to have mobile phones, and we're getting into a discussion about something and they want to verify information, they will often raise their voice, call on Alexa, and ask for the fact base. So my husband and I are not as diligent at that. We still try to actually think it through and maybe look for information in another way, but they almost always go to Alexa as a source to find information that is available online. People use Alexa for reminders, and it is marketed as a way to build a to-do list that you can access anywhere. Add grocery list items to a list, for example. But the big one here is that Alexa is being marketed as a way to combat loneliness. And this is the one that the article picked up here in the Tribune, in the Union Tribune, this idea of loneliness, and thinking particularly of a moment in our recent time where loneliness has been on the rise, and it's been a real factor as we locked indoors with the pandemic. This idea that people felt social isolation, and could machines that have AI embedded in them be a source to alleviate some loneliness. The idea of safely I like the way that they use safely interact, because that also plays on us to try and remember that there are concerns that lay outside. And so this idea of safety, but as I explained, when I explained how Alexa works, there's some privacy concerns here that are kind of a little bit brushed aside as we talk about safety. So that's worth thinking about and remembering as well. So one of the things I wanted to share with you in a whistle stop tour is how do these things actually work in more generally in terms of the kind of AI that's behind them. I talked about the human trainers who are behind taking a sample of the back and forth requests recorded and training the data to be more accurate. So there's this corpus of training data that, and if we sit back and think about that, no other time in human history have we been able to gather this kind of data where everyone who owns these devices is contributing to this corpus of training data. And it's a rich source that many researchers like myself try to get access to, but many times it is proprietary access that we've signed on to with our terms of service that belongs to the company and is not actually available to researchers. So we're always a little bit jealous of the training data. We know too that you can program a machine to respond in a particular way. A calculator is simply a machine that is programmed to respond to particular requests for mathematical functions. And that's all it does. That's the way technology used to be. But machine learning came about in around the 1950s. That fundamentally changed the game. So machine learning offers us this view. It's a subset of artificial intelligence where computer algorithms are used to autonomously learn from the data and information, which means that you don't need as many humans in the back end programming and reprogramming. This idea that the machine will on its own be able to learn based on the data that it gets from the exchanges that it's encountering. And so this idea of autonomous learning is the big game changer here. The Turing test, which came up around the same time, was this idea is that the holy grail for artificial intelligence is to be able to pass a test that Alan Turing created to determine if a computer has real intelligence. So to pass a test, a computer must be able to fool a human into believing that it is also a human. And so if you can actually be unclear about whether you're communicating with another human or with a machine or a bot or a robot, then basically the Turing test is being performed. There are many people who use social media and engage in battles on exchanges in the feedback parts where people talk to each other. And a lot of the research that we're doing now is showing that those aren't actually other humans. They are robots or social bots posing as humans and engaging people to interact with each other, because that ramps up the amount of engaged use on the platform, which makes people stay on the platform longer and longer. And so a lot of the new devices, new platforms, for example, Mastun is one, is asking people to declare whether it's a bot or a human behind the profile. And so this is kind of a new move that we're starting to see on the platforms. But this idea of the Turing test, as many people will find, if you search, Google some funny videos of Alexa use online, you'll start seeing a little bit where people are treating Alexa as if it is a person behind the algorithm versus it being a machine that has been programmed, but also is learning as it goes. Natural language processing, again, the 1950s was a hotbed for this area that I'm studying, where all these things were starting to coalesce from different disciplines coming together. And natural language processing was certainly an area that really blew things apart and allowed speech recognition to become one of the foremost input devices that we could use for these technologies. Our very own U of T, Geoffrey Hinton, coined the term deep learning in 2006. And in this idea of deep learning, what he was talking about is that algorithms, he's speaking of algorithms that let computers basically see and distinguish objects and texts in images and videos. Some of you that might know that Facebook had developed a piece of their software called DeepFace. And it was basically a software algorithm that with key statistical techniques, for example, exploitation-based learning, where computer analyzes data and basically can discard unimportant data in visual information. So we can almost think about people starting with voice input, but this is going to move into visual and video very soon. And so I can expect things like the future of Alexa and these kinds of voice assistants to morph into voice and visual interfaces as well. So I'm gonna, for those of you that thought I was gonna get more technical, you can breathe a sigh of relief. I'm done with that. I'm gonna move now into what does communicating with robots actually mean for human society? And this is where you wanna get into this idea that social robots, are they really our friends? We can see here in this image, this graphic I show, these robots in and about in society, just around us. And this is sort of futuristic, but there are parts of Asia, we already have robots in these formats, helping people to navigate within a store or in the public domain. And so the question we ask from a sort of more humanities or semantic meaning making perspective is, are social robots really our friends? Do they have our best interests at heart? And do they qualify in the same way as a human who would provide the same kind of service? Would they qualify? So if a social robot or a bot is a particular kind of technology, and it tries to stimulate human behavior, the little bots I talked about in social media that are in there to engage us in discussions, what we have found is that their sole purpose in many cases, particularly in political forum, is to change our public opinion, to sway public opinion, and to use techniques of human to human exchanges to influence us into taking a particular action. And so I want to say here that it is not innocuous, and we can't go into this thinking that all these social bots are friendly. They have their interests, they have particular purposes. Whoever is behind and programming them and leading them towards autonomous machine learning corrective techniques, they have a goal. And so we have to, with a friend, any other friend we have, are our goals aligned? Are these social robots across the board going to be able to do the things that we want them to do in a way that we'd like them to do it? So this is the humanistic perspective to think about whether or not these devices will engage with people. Will people know that they're engaging with a robot? And bigger questions, will people trust robots and want to engage with them? Or will we have a backlash where people push away these kinds of technologies in favor of human-to-human interaction once again? So the question that I often ask my students to grapple with is, what will communicating with robots mean for broader society? So semantics, which is taught in many different ways at Victoria College. Semantics is basically the idea of searching for meaning in the interpretation of words and signs and sentences. And so semantics is really what we understand when we read something, how we understand others, and what decisions we make as a result of those interpretations. So semantics and the study of semantics is really about logic, context awareness, and meaning making. And this is the part that these social robots are not as good at yet, right? They're not good at fully understanding things like context or fully understanding the way that humans apply logic, which is often not the same as the way a machine applies logic. And so these are the areas that are being contested as we figure out meaning making going forward. So I'm going to end the last slide here, the fifth question. Can we opt out of a world of human machine communication? There are small ways. Yes, absolutely, we could opt out. For example, with Alexa, you could choose to straight up not have one in and around. Although I will tell you this, I didn't intentionally get an Alexa in our household. I bought a Ring doorbell, which is a company also was acquired by Amazon. The Ring doorbell shipped with an Alexa screen as a freebie. And so it was a way for us to, inside the house, see what the camera was seeing outside with the doorbell, but it was built in with the Alexa AI. And it was only accidentally that we realized we had Alexa, as one of my children was talking about Alexa, and the wake word went up, and then we got a response. And then we're like, we didn't even know we had invited Alexa inside our home. So there are small ways to opt out. As I say, you could just simply make sure you don't have one. You could have one, but then take some precautions, right? You could, as I do periodically, try and manage the voice recordings within the system and go through the settings and the privacy and so on to periodically delete those recordings. You used to be able to say, Alexa, delete everything I've said. This doesn't seem to be working as well anymore. And that would be probably a decision because of the training data and the importance of that training data. But I will say this, can we opt out? It is harder and harder to opt out of systems that use human-machine communication in their core. We are on the road scientifically that says that there are some really good reasons why we want to stay opted in to some of these technologies. Yet at the same time, it's going to be up to our humanists and our educators, our economists and computer scientists, our philosophers and our social scientists to work together to chart the way forward of how we want to live in a world that will increasingly include artificial intelligent machines. So I'm going to stop. I've spoken enough and leave some room now for some questions. I look forward to hearing from you now. And you can put things in the chat. And I know I'll be helped if I have to find things in the chat, but if you wanted to just ask a question, please feel free to do that. I'm going to start looking in my chat as I go here. So someone said, and I love this, I found it a little creepy. The question didn't imply Alexa was a best friend. The device AI extended the conversation to be more intimate. I know that that is a fascinating observation, right? That I didn't ask about that, but the AI took me to that direction. And the question was asked here was wondering how or why the conversation went in that direction. Well, so Lee, the question went in that direction because it is in the interest of the Alexa platform and the AI to try and bring that connection, that intimacy basically will tie us and lock us into a relationship with Alexa that we normally may not have. I might have just kept using Alexa to do my, I don't know, my grocery list. But the long game for Amazon is to integrate these technologies into the smart home so that you could, for example, say to Alexa, please reduce my thermostat by 3 degrees between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. And that integration, the ability to trust in Alexa to do that integration and to do that and more things in the household requires a level of comfort and intimacy. And in a way, it would require us to feel Alexa is more friendly than we might originally have thought. I saw Wendy Cecil's hand up, and I don't know if it's still up, but please go ahead.
Yes, it's up. Hello, Rhonda, and thank you so much for a fabulous lecture. I am new to all of this kind of technology, but I have a couple of questions. One is related to the voice that's used on these robots, because as far as I know, it's always female. And it seems to me that that may be because it is a less threatening voice and more easily accepted as something that might help you. I had one experience in the airport in Seoul, Korea, where we had come off a flight and we were greeted by a lot of robots directing us, and people were running away from them, and the robots were following them, and there were a few children who started to cry, and it was just like, go away, I don't want to talk to you. So I was hoping you might make a comment about the female voice and about our initial horror of a machine that talks to us and follows us physically.
That's such a great story, Wendy. Thanks for sharing that. It's definitely something that we're looking at very carefully. First of all, the gendering of these technologies. We certainly do find, even if you use a car, if you have a more recent model of a vehicle and you use Google Maps or any of these other systems, some of them respond verbally in terms of turn taking and navigation. You can change the voice, but the default voice does tend to be female. And it is coming out of psych studies that show that people do feel less threatened by a woman's voice in these systems, or a voice that is gender neutral, that you can't really tell if it's a man or a woman. That seems to be less threatening than a man, a man with an authoritative voice. However, it depends on what one of the studies I'm about to, I had to pause for the pandemic, but my lab at VicU is going to continue an experiment that looks at whether it is about questions of knowledge. So, for example, if it is a question where you feel that the knowledge base needs to be sufficiently high, will a male voice with a very deep timbre actually be more trustworthy than another kind of voice? So it seems to be a lot of my colleagues who research this talk about the fact that if the task is oriented towards lower level information, that women's voices tend to work. if it is sort of higher order, something of like health information, for example, that they do tend to gravitate towards male voices. So this is really interesting, right? And we're still watching how this plays out. But this is, again, how other disciplines come in, linguistics, people who are studying psychology and social linguistics. We're using a lot of the data from those studies. But yeah, the thing about being in Asia and being right now, they have the most social robots out in the world. In hospitals, what we're finding is that people are very comfortable with having a robot that lifts the beds or moves people. And they're using them a lot in healthcare, especially in emergency care. But in airports, it's always interesting too that the longer people get exposed to them, the fewer times they run away. And we're looking to in my lab, at whether children have a different perspective on this than adults. And it might be that the children reacted in fear to the unknown. But as you start to get familiar with these objects in your social setting, the less fear you tend to have. So we're testing out these issues of fear right now. I'm about to kick those studies off again. Thanks
Just
so much.
two things on that. The robots in Asia had eyelashes, which was like a humanizing touch. The other comment about the authority of the male voice and the gentler side of the female, are we not going to only reinforce gender roles if we stick with that? There's potential there to change attitudes, or will we just back off and accept them? Yeah, thank you very much for answering those questions, Rhonda.
No, great. Those were great, really great highlights. I see a couple of, I don't know if I can see any other hands. I didn't see another hand come up, but I could go back to the chat. I see another set of questions here. I see a question here, somebody regarding AI and the future of academia with recent advancement of technologies like GPT-3 that I'm looking at too, and ChatGPT. How are universities planning to deal with potential AI augmented plagiarism and cheating in the context of the college essay? Oh, Andrew, you went right to the heart of it. We are grappling with it even now. There are systems that we can incorporate into the classroom. Perhaps as a student, you encountered some of them. And these systems are starting to get APIs that pull in GPT-3 so that we can see whether those statements were made before. But it is making it very complex and very difficult. So this is a wicked problem for academia to grapple with, how we manage plagiarism when these written, so GPT-3, for those that don't know it, is an openly accessible and ChatGPT artificial intelligence that uses text. So you can type in and it will reply with a body of text. What we notice is they tend to still draw on the same corpus. And if we start seeing the corpus over and over, we can use algorithms of our own, we meaning these companies that create these checkers for plagiarism, to identify that it is actually an algorithm producing it because it's reusing a certain set of phrases over and over. But as autonomous learning happens, this gets to be a more and more difficult problem. It's a wicked problem. I see one more piece here. Thank you, Abigail, for your kind comments. And then I see here this question: is there current research or vetting for any protocols like these technologies for pulling information from the cloud and challenges or controversies with misinformation, especially related to COVID-19 and other kinds of issues? Yes, so this is one area that is still coming through. There is very little policing. There's very little regulation on these systems. When I did my master's in telecommunications engineering, I did my minor in law and policy of telecommunications. And at the time, this was in 2000, we were grappling with the idea that we want innovation to proceed. And to do that, we tend to reduce the amount of regulation in a system. And it's really interesting because for broadcasts like TV and radio, we've always regulated heavily, both in the United States and in Canada. But for internet technologies, we pulled back on regulations and allowed sort of innovation to flourish by allowing people to try things out and see how let the market decide. Increasingly, though, with misinformation and disinformation, where it's actually done to deceive, we see that there is likely now going to be a reaction to this, and Zuckerberg's being called to account by the legal system for things that the platform allows. This idea that it's a pipeline, that the pipeline doesn't control what goes through the pipeline. That has been the argument in the past, that it's just carriage. So, for example, the railroad line maker, this is where the idea comes from, isn't responsible for what the trains carry on them. So we ported that into technology to say the bits and the carriage of our information, the people that do that, like service providers and platforms, should not be penalized for what is transported over these information networks. This idea is starting to descend, to just break apart at the edges because of the consequences of not having some regulatory controls in these spaces. Then the consequences are high, and the consequences involve human life as well. So it's not just a matter of, you made a bad decision. It could be a life or death decision that you made a bad decision about based on the information that you received. And so there is kind of this growing voice that we need to revisit this idea that the carriage should be separated from the content, that we may need to rethink the risk that we have added to human society by not regulating in the internet industries. I see that Erlene has a question, and Erlene has a great question. Erlene, by the way, that's my mom's name too, so I feel like you're my mom asking me this question. As a philosophy graduate, I wonder what sort of discussions I might have with fact-based Alexa, right? Well, it's interesting, and I think if you can, either Alexa or any of the others, you should try it out. It's fascinating, right? And I think I would love our philosophers to really, really join us in understanding what the consequences of these technologies are. I think philosophers bring a lot to the table, especially when I talked about ideas of logic, context, meaning making, and semantics. So, philosophers are excellent on the ethics as well of these systems. And so one of the things that philosophically we could hotly debate are some of the things that even Wendy raised here. What are the consequences of doubling down on stereotypes that we've built over time? Philosophically, is this exchange, and is it a conversation that we're having, a higher order conversation, or is it basically just tactics of the system? What kinds of questions do we want AI to address more broadly? And what are the kinds of questions that they are better built for at the moment? How far do we let autonomous machine learning go? And what then would have to be in place to counteract some of the consequences of sort of unfettered development of AI in that direction? If you're interested in this, and Erlene, and you're a philosophy student, I would check out ChatGPT. You can Google it, and you'll see that you can actually try to have a kind of an exchange, a conversation. And I'd be really fascinated to hear your ideas as a philosophy student to understand and build some of those ideas into my own work, which is why I'm delighted to have my lab at Vic, because of people like yourself. I see people here are like, I do not want either of them in my life. and I appreciate that so much. The thing is, I think it's going to get harder, right? They're coming right now built into our phones. These systems are coming part and parcel. They're built into many of the new technologies. I saw one of the Samsung refrigerators the other day. I was looking at them, and they actually are building in AI there. So it could tell you what food you're running out of and give you a hint on what you need to buy in your next grocery shop. So these things are coming, whether we look at it in terms of smart thermostats that in our homes now that help save energy. So very positive reasons why we want some of these technologies. For a city in South Korea, that was basic household one response if they're not able to get to an emergency response. So there are some really positive reasons that these technologies should and do evolve. The question really comes, how much do we allow it to go, and what do we need to have in place as well as these technologies evolve? A question that would be very sophisticated is, what am I thinking? And that's one of the questions. Really great, Ilana, to come up with that. But if you ask Alexa, and I'll ask Alexa not that specific question, but one very similar, they return with an interesting set of rhetoric, which is what I've been thinking about. And maybe we think the same things, and then they kind of go into this amazing exchange. And so it's not an uncommon response. It's not a response that a human wouldn't give. So it gets really interesting to figure that out. So I saw someone, I think Anne had commented too, that this is exactly what we who work in film, theater, and literature need to know about. And I'm really glad to hear that, because I'm naming my lab Emerging Technologies and the Arts for this reason, because I really do feel there's a strong connection that is missing. And it's something that Vic, you will be able to do very easily and very quickly and take a leading role in. I don't know if we have any other questions or anything that I've missed. Louise, maybe if you see anything that I could be interested in.
There was one other question about, in general, about social robots, in particular OpenAI's chat box, and how that might affect society, jobs in particular.
Right. Okay. So the question of jobs has been around as long as we've mechanized, right? This question of will jobs remove humans has been going on since the Industrial Revolution. What we see now is this, and the usual glib answer that you see or you hear is that machines will make way for humans to do more complex tasks, and the machines will take up the repetitive tasks. And the opposite of a wicked problem that I talked about in the beginning is what we call a kind problem, or a kind problem environment, which is one where patterns, the ability to recognize a pattern quickly and come up with a response to that pattern. Humans do it, and it's like the foundations of games like chess, but that machines are actually always going to beat humans eventually on that kind of, because they just have more processing power to be able to run through every possible pattern and every possible response in a moment. So kind problems are ones where machines are already have been, making headway. Wicked problems, though, are ones where we have to be able to draw on domain experience and breadth experience across a wide range of knowledge bases. And this is one where humans continue to be stronger in the ability to flex and use limited amounts of information to make a decision. That's where humans remain very strong. And so, in terms of human jobs, we know that there will be some jobs that chatbots are better suited for. And I know people have been using them. For example, I recently was doing a purchase from IKEA for my lab chairs, and the chatbot helped me through a very basic set of questions that would be easy to solve, versus a more complex problem when part of my order didn't come and I needed to talk to a person who could help me figure out what had gone wrong with the provisioning of the order. And so there are impacts. And the thing that I want us to remember in the glib answer that the robots will leave the better jobs for humans is that not everyone will have the educational background and the experience and the access to the domain knowledge to get to those higher earning and higher complex jobs that solve the wicked problems. There are many people who depend on those other jobs that are not the jobs that will be available if machines take those particular jobs away. So this is why, if I stay with Alexa, Amazon had recently announced 10,000 employees would be losing their jobs in the organization. That was just a couple of weeks ago, and it is mostly in their device business, which is Alexa business. The inability to truly monetize Alexa, it is free. It is not a paid for subscription. It's a one-time purchase. They have not been able to solve, can we monetize these voice AIs? We see loss of employment there, and also in their broader Amazon business of provisioning purchases for online retail. The robots that they use in that particular part of their business, workers are unionizing and asking to be unionized increasingly because they say morale is low and the salaries are also too low in those businesses. So these are not incompatible or separate issues. They actually are coming up at the same time within the same organizations. So it's really a great question to ask. Go ahead, Louise, were you gonna?
Oh, it's
No,
Vito.
I
hi,
think we're
Vito.
good.
No, thank you. I wanted to thank you so much, President McEwen. That was insightful, thought-provoking, maybe scary at times, but I think we're all sort of thinking about this differently now. And we really appreciate you taking the time today to kind of share some of these views. And I'm really interested in this lab. I've got to come in and visit someday.
Please do. It's
Well,
been my
thank you.
pleasure. Thank you all very much for your attention, for your interest, for your focus, and I hope that I sparked some interest for you to keep thinking about these kinds of questions.
Thank you so much. Before we conclude today, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank. There's a few people that really helped put this together from the staff and office of the Alumni Affairs and Advancement Office. In particular, you may see her. Her name is Helena Herscovici. Thank you so much to her and for her part in making today's event possible. So thank you, Helena. I want to conclude the call today, but I also want to invite you to stay just a little longer. We have the Vic Chorus, who will be joining us again for another song to help put us in that happy holiday season. But in the meantime, please have a great holiday, be safe, get some rest, and we look forward to connecting with you in the new year. Thank you, everyone.